Now let's get into 5 more of our 30 key questions. And as the episodes keep on going, the questions get more hard hitting. So we've got 5 kind of difficult questions here to answer. Starting with question number 21. Which player is under the most pressure this season? There are a lot of different ways that you could tackle this one. But Jackson, let's get started with you. Which player do you think is under the most pressure to perform this season?
I mean, honestly, it's not going to surprise you guys, but I think it's Joel Embiid. I mean, I think he'll be under the most pressure. Well, I put another guy, but it's a guy that Miles mentioned, so I'm not going to take his thunder. But I think it's Joel Embiid. I mean, it's gonna it just keeps going towards his record every year that he doesn't make it out of the second round, and I feel like that's a lot of pressure. Like being the only MVP to never make it out of the second round is kind of crazy. I mean, I know I'm known for being a hater, but I feel like even if I wasn't like a known hater, I feel like this would make sense just because, like I said, the only MVP to never make it out of the second round. And I feel like that's a big thing because if you're an MVP, you're supposed to be a guy that can kind of get it done. Joel Embiid kind of reminds me of Aaron Judge in that sense because he's great in the regular season, but in the playoffs, he hasn't always been the best. He was better last year, but he hasn't always been the best, if that makes sense.
Ironically enough, because I had a feeling that some of you guys were going to bring my player, I actually had Joel Embiid as my player under the most pressure.
Dude, what?
Kind of Twilight Zone episode.
Unbelievable. But no, I do think Joel Embiid is a player that is under, a ton of pressure because of that very reason. He is the only MVP to not make it out of the second round. And although, you could say what you want about the foul baiting, I don't like, that part of his game or whatever. He is kind of a dirty player on the defensive side. But the way he plays, I mean, offensively, scoring 35 points a game last season when he played 30 points previous seasons, I respect how dominant of a player he is during the regular season. I think that he is one of the best in the game when he plays. But I obviously, you can't fully say he's one of the best in the game because he isn't, consistent when it comes to playing games, staying healthy, and he hasn't made it out of the second round. So I think it is fair to say that there is a lot of pressure on him, to perform this coming season, especially playoff time. But as far as a player who is probably number one as far as pressure goes, Nick, why don't you go ahead? Because I'm guessing one of you guys have the other player.
I do have a guy that was previously mentioned. Let me just talk on Joel for a minute. He's even under more pressure now because, I mean, you brought in Paul George, and that puts, a target on the Sixers' back a bit as a top team in the East. My player is sorry. Yeah, I lost my train of thought. My player is Jimmy Butler in a contract year, and another guy who has actually kind of the opposite, is really good in the playoffs, has a reputation for being really good in the playoffs, and then not so good in the regular season. That kind of shoots the Heat in the foot sometimes, and he gets a lot of flack for that. But, I mean, even just thinking back to when they did make the finals a couple of years ago, he gets a lot of credit for, being the guy who carried them there, quote unquote, but you still had Bam Adebayo. I mean, you were out with Tyler Hero that whole run, but those role players were really the guys who carried the Heat to that finals appearance and allowed them to knock off the Celtics and the Bucks when they were the 8th seed. And it was like guys like Gabe Vincent and Max Strus who really lit it up during the playoffs that year. It wasn't necessarily Jimmy himself.
That's very true.
It was Jimmy, but I think Jimmy's under a lot of pressure because he's in a contract year and he's kind of had a couple off seasons.
I definitely want to see him and the Heat team as a whole do better in the regular season just to prove everybody wrong. At least the pressure on the regular season for them has to be there because they have made the finals within the last 5 years. That's pretty recent to me.
Twice in the last 5 years.
Twice in the last 5 years. So, honestly, come to the playoffs, it's the regular season for me. They have the most pressure because they have the talent. They have the guys to do it. They just don't. I meant to say after he said Paul George. That being said, we did get news right before we started recording that he hyperextended his knee.
Yes, which is very unfortunate.
We don't know the timetable yet. I just got that update as well. Got a
Also,
little
some
later
more
than you.
some more Sixers news that I just saw. Regarding Joel Embiid, he might never play a back-to-back ever again. That's what I've been seeing all day.
Which
I mean,
honestly, I'm
it's probably a
100%
good thing
fine
for him.
with. I would love to see that happen because it
Yeah.
should mean, I mean, it should lessen, the chances of him getting severely injured during the regular season. And he should be in good shape when it comes to playoff time. So I think that, that could definitely help them. Paul George already getting injured is not the best. Hopefully it's nothing too extremely serious. But the Sixers do have the depth this year to kind of bypass that a little bit, or at least better than they did last year, because they weren't an exceptional basketball team by any means last season. And a lot of it was because when Embiid was injured for more than half the year, it was Tyrese Maxey who was balling out, of course. Then Kelly Oubre. They traded for Buddy Hield to try to fix that up a little bit, but overall, it just was not the best formula. Tobias Harris on the Sixers, who was inconsistent in Philadelphia.
I mean, what was I lost my train of thought too.
Jackson, you said you were a known hater. I don't know if I've ever heard anyone call you that. Mostly, it's unknown hater is what I've heard.
I don't know about that one.
You're so funny.
Or Joey, what player do you have as under the most pressure?
I have Jalen Brunson, actually.
Ooh, interesting.
He is the guy. They just upgraded from Julius Randle. Like we were talking how Joel Embiid, they just got Paul George to help him out. They just upgraded from Julius Randle to Karl Anthony Towns, especially since they needed a bigger dude as well to get some boards because Mitchell Robinson will probably be out for a while. But Jalen Brunson carried them a whole lot of the year last year, especially when Randall got injured and was out for like the second half of the year, and carried him into the playoffs. He got hurt at the end of the playoffs, but like realistically, he was getting them there. But they haven't made it past the second round yet either. If you're going to be the king of New York, especially of the New York Knicks, that fan base, you made it to the playoffs. You made it to the second round twice. You've had excuses that are legit, but they want more. They need more.
I see what you're saying.
They crave more. Yeah, you get what I'm saying.
If you're going to be the Big Apple, you got to take a bite.
You have to. You have to be the man. You have to be the man, and you gotta prove it. You gotta prove it.
Yeah, I mean, look, the New York Knicks. I mean, there are honestly a lot of ways you could attack this kind of question. As far as this season goes, and for the impact on their team, Jalen Brunson could definitely be up there because this is a season that the Knicks in a loaded Eastern Conference, or at least a deep Eastern Conference, the Knicks should rightfully so, I think, have the mindset of conference finals or bust, or even NBA finals or bust, because they have the defenders to combat a Tatum or Brown or the Celtics, which not a lot of other teams can do. But if they are to get to that point, they need Jalen Brunson to play like he has the last couple seasons.
If he needs to play like a legit MVP contender, and if their ceiling for me is like NBA finals, but if they don't even make the conference finals, Jalen Brunson is going to have to get some criticism.
Do you think he'd be a disappointing
unless he
season?
Gets injured, obviously.
If the Knicks didn't get past the second round, would this be a disappointing season?
Oh, 100%. Three second-round exits in a row?
Yeah.
I would probably agree. Unless there's weird seeding and they end up having to play the Celtics in round 2 or something and it's a competitive series.
There are always things that injuries could derail it too. Obviously, if Cat and Jalen Brunson get injured, they don't make it to the conference championship. I'm not going to look at it and be like, wow, this is a disappointing season. They had nobody.
Let's think back a year ago, literally to the day with the Dame trade and how Dame and Giannis were under like a lot of pressure to perform in year one, and that didn't happen. So it is not necessarily a reset in New York, but it's year one with Jalen and Cat and McCallum.
That's it. That is the thing. Like for this team being, the second seed in the East last season, they do have a much different looking team because of the moves that they made in the summer to get Bridges, to get Towns. You lose Hartenstein, you lose DiVincenzo. So it is a much different looking team. Final thing on this question before we move on. I think a player that could be talked about, not in the sense of, for their career yet, but for their team to be successful. I think Anthony Edwards has a legit case for this question because with the trading of Karl Anthony Towns to New York, they are fully, depending on Anthony Edwards to have another jump to become one of the top players in the world in order to be successful or come close to where they were last season. So in order for that to happen, they need Anthony Edwards to take that jump because right now, when you look at the rest of the Wolves, lots of solid all-around pieces. They do have a deep team now that they've made this trade, and now DiVincenzo is on the bench with Reed, Nickeil Alexander-Walker. But which of those guys is going to be the legit number 2? I think Randall could because of the numbers that he has put up, but they're going to need, Anthony Edwards to really shine there in Minnesota. That's where it's all going to start and end with, is how Anthony Edwards progresses.